Hello, and thank you for joining us. My name is Diana Anderson. I'm a paralegal for the Consumer Protection Unit at the Delaware Department of Justice and the moderator for today's panel. Today's presentation is being hosted by the Delaware Department of Justice for the National Consumer Protection Week. During this presentation, our panelists will be discussing recommendations for when you purchase your next vehicle. I'm pleased to introduce our panelists for today. George T. Lees joined the DOJ in October 2018. Prior to joining the DOJ, he was in a private practice in the state for 21 years, litigating a broad range of matters in all the courts of the state. While in private practice, he was involved in numerous matters involving automobile dealerships, including sales and warranty disputes. Next is Karen Carson. She has served as the Chief of the Compliance and Investigations Unit for the Delaware Division of Motor Vehicles since 2020. After spending over 9 years as a DMV investigator conducting investigations on internal and external fraud, counterfeit documents, criminal impersonation, regulating motor vehicle dealerships, and providing fraudulent document recognition training, prior to joining the DMV, she began her career with the state in 2002, where she worked as a police officer at 2 Delaware agencies. Next, we have Special Investigator LaVincent Harris, who joined the DOJ in November of 2017. Prior to joining the DOJ, he served at Delaware Capitol Police for 3 years and was Officer of the Year in 2016. Before that, he served with the Newcastle County Police Department for 20 years, assigned to patrol and the Criminal Investigative Unit as a detective. First, we're going to begin with DAG George T. Lees. Mr. Lees.
Absolutely. Well, good afternoon, everyone. One of the things that we want to talk to you about, kind of starting the whole process of getting a car, is what are your automotive needs? Is this a first vehicle, a second vehicle? Is it going to be your daily driver? Are you going to use it to go to work? It really comes down to being very honest with yourself at the outset of how am I going to use this vehicle and what am I going to use it for? Obviously, we all want, or maybe not all of us, but some of us want that Bugatti or a brand new Corvette, but that may not be the most practical vehicle for you and how you're going to use the vehicle and how it's going to best fit your lifestyle. So I'll open it up to my colleagues, Karen and LaVincent, whether they have any additional suggestions or ideas on things people should consider when you're starting the process of looking for a car.
My one suggestion, and it's probably going to be a common theme, is to do that research ahead of time by talking to people and going online to see what the different types of vehicles offer, and that way, and what they cost, and that way there's no surprise or sticker shock when you get to the dealership.
Fantastic information, Karen. Thank you so much. George, let's talk more about the budget that we need to look into in buying a vehicle.
Absolutely. So everyone thinks if you've been to a car dealership, the first thing that they ask you when you get to the dealership is what can you afford? And what they're talking about is the monthly payment, meaning how much either in principal and interest you're going to pay, whether it be for 3 years, 5 years, or 7 years to pay off that vehicle. But the other things to keep in mind as you're buying a vehicle is to legally drive a vehicle in the state of Delaware, you have to have insurance on the vehicle. How much is that going to cost? If I'm financing it, is the finance company or the lender going to require me to carry collision? That increases the cost of your insurance. Other things like I mentioned, fuel. Does it need other repairs that you're aware of that's going to affect your budget? These are all the things really that a smart buyer is going to look at when they start going out and thinking about cars, not just what can I afford now, but what can I afford going forward? And that should factor a little bit, quite frankly, into identifying your automotive needs.
Karen, typically people buy new cars about every 3 years. It takes, a long time, and you may need to refresh your memory on some of the websites. Do you have any that you would suggest?
I would suggest going to the variety of state and federal websites that are available, such as Department of Justice. That will help you identify if there's any scams or anything that you should be aware of, especially if you're going to be purchasing online or from a private seller. I would go to the Division of Motor Vehicle website. We have tips on purchasing new vehicles and used vehicles. and calculators for figuring out how much it's going to cost you for registration and document fee. And I would just do a lot of research on independent sites as well. NADA would be a good one to find, the average retail or average trade-in for the vehicle. And you can go to a variety of other websites that are independent, Consumer Reports, things like that, that will help give you some idea of which cars are reliable, what are the common complaints about certain vehicles, and which vehicles have the least amount of complaints and have been tried, true, and tested as far as safety as well.
Now, George, do you have any negotiating tips to provide when we're at the dealerships?
When you know you're buying a vehicle and you get to the point where you're negotiating, it never hurts to bring someone with you to help you. Whoever that person may be that can help negotiate for you and lend some some force to your negotiations. The biggest thing, quite frankly, is when you go back and forth is realize what your limits are. Don't let them bully you or push you into agreeing to something that you're not comfortable with kind of a we've got to hurry up and get it done. I've got other people looking at the car. Truthfully, if they're using that approach with you, then you need to say, fine, then let those other people buy that car. Don't let them push you or bully you. And always, truthfully, keep the ability to walk away.
Thank you so much. Now, we've been talking about researching vehicles before we go out and buy them. LaVincent, do you have any information on why we should even purchase that vehicle history report when we don't even know if we're going to buy it?
Yes, what you're talking about with a vehicle report of the history of it, they're relatively short documents that are available online through brands such as AutoCheck, Carfax, and InstaVin. These reports typically cost less than $100 and may provide limited information for free, some of them, and then some dealers may offer to show you a vehicle history report. It's critical that you get vehicle history report. And the ones that I'm most familiar with are Carfax. That's an excellent tool for any consumer to purchase and use in the research of that vehicle. It's simple to use. You can scroll right down. You can see if there was an accident. You can see when the repairs are made to the vehicle. You basically have a timeline of everything right in front of you.
I'm going to add, Carfax report or other report. Look at safety recalls, and then also look at the manufacturer's website for things like known warranty issues or known problems where there's a recall on that vehicle, that there's a manufacturer recall for additional repairs. So you can educate yourself as to whether that's been done on the vehicle that you're buying, or if that's something that's going to tie the vehicle up in the shop for weeks or months while that repair is pending.
Karen, do you have any information about purchases from non-traditional dealers, such as like private sellers or online for used vehicles?
A lot of times people will sell vehicles on the side of the road. You don't know where they got the vehicle from. Make sure that they have the title in hand and that the individual that is selling you the title is the individual whose name is listed on the front of the title. They may not have the authority to sell it if they are not the person on the title. That's where also Carfax will come in handy. I would suggest doing a Carfax on any used vehicle that you are buying from a private seller as well, and see what the last title state and issue was, because that's going to be the only title that's legally valid. If you're concerned about a title and you can get a copy of it or get the VIN number for the vehicle, that's your best bet. If you have a copy and you want to of the title and you want to do a sale, you can always meet that individual at the DMV website, DMV any DMV location. Come in and you can process the sale right there. We can make sure that all of the paperwork is in order. And if they're not willing to do that and they're not willing to allow you to run that VIN prior to purchasing it, that's definitely a red flag. Do not give cash without the title or the vehicle in hand.
Now, LaVincent, if you're buying a used car, should you really get an independent inspection?
Yes, you should. Every time that I would look for a vehicle, I'd make sure that I'd have that vehicle inspected by an independent mechanic nearby. If you go to the graphic, I can explain what I'm talking about. Okay, so I looked at a vehicle and it had nice pictures and I was like, wow, I like this. But then when you look at the results of the inspection, you'll find that the door hinge paint was bubbling, possibly due to rust. The rear brakes were down to 3 to 4 millimeters. Rotors are rusted over and in poor shape. The rear right axle had seepage and the left side was not far behind. Front track bar jam nut was loose. Both end bolts were loose. The rear of the engine, that goes the engine, the bell housing was wet with oil. The rear of the head gasket as well was wet. The right front sway bar link nut was loose. The front bumper hardware was loose and noisy. The front drive shaft and the transfer case CV joint was missing a boot, and it was full of debris and it was noisy. The front brakes were down to 5.5 to 6 millimeters. The life was okay. The rotors were rusted and grooved. There was no antenna present for the radio, and the front of the lower oil pan was seeping oil and had a light leakage of oil. So I had the option now as a consumer to know that I don't want that car, but I was willing because I liked the way it looked. I said, well, maybe it might not be expensive. So then I emailed our family mechanic who handles all our repairs. And I asked him to look at this report. So if you go to the next one, you'll see our exchange. So I get in contact with the mechanic and he says right away, wow, I'd say a hard no. I see nothing but headaches, head gasket leaks, rear main oil seal leaks, oil pan leaks. You're talking about thousands of dollars. Rear brakes, janky lift kit and suspension components, front drive shaft replacement, dollar sign, dollar sign, dollar sign. That's a whole lot of dollar signs that I don't have in my pocket to be putting in for a car that I'm buying, okay? But if I didn't do that and I went for the shiny thing and made that purchase, I'd be pulling lint out my pockets trying to fix all this stuff. And I'd be upset and I'd be stuck with that vehicle. So it's very important. It's an investment if you can do it. And if you budget for it, have that vehicle inspected by a good mechanic before you make that purchase. It'll go a long way. It'll save you a lot of headache and you'll be happy and nobody be fussing at you. Why'd you buy this car? You know, this car ain't no good. And I told you shouldn't be. You don't hear all that because you got a nice car. And that's what it's all about. So that's what I have to say about that.
Very informative. Thank you very much. Now, let's talk about titles, George.
Absolutely. And I mentioned it briefly before, and I'm going to pull it up right now for everybody to see, because I mentioned about disclosures for rebuilt, salvage, flood damage, etc. And as I mentioned, individuals selling a vehicle don't have to fill out this form and don't have to disclose it, but you need to ask the question. Dealerships, however, are required to fill this out if they're selling you a vehicle that meets any of those criterion. So look closely at the disclosures, look closely at what you're signing, and more importantly, look at the title. They're supposed to have the title in their hand when they're doing a deal with you. If they don't, that's a flag. So Karen, you actually investigate this all the time. Do you have any other suggestions?
Just that when you go to purchase a vehicle, whether it's new or used, you're going to be signing many, many, many pieces of paper. And sometimes things such as this will just slip through as another paper they put in front of you to sign. It's very important that you read each document that you put your name to. It's a binding contract. And again, as George said, licensed motor vehicle dealers are required to have you see that form, disclose what brand it has. And if they did not do that, they are required to take the vehicle back and refund your money. But a private seller has no such requirements. It would be a civil issue. You would need to take them to court and you may never get any sort of restitution for that.
It's great information. Now, this kind of goes into what we're already discussing, but the purchase contract. George, do you have any information to share with us?
Absolutely. And again, I'm going to share my screen so everybody can see what I'm talking about. One of the first documents they're going to ask you to sign is the buyer's order. And that's basically just the agreement where you say, okay, I want to buy this vehicle. And I pulled up on the screen a sample buyer's order. Let me blow it up a little bit, be easier for everybody to see. But there's a block for the dealership name and the dealership license. If somebody's holding themselves out as a dealership and their name doesn't show up on DMV's website, then they're not a licensed dealership and they shouldn't be selling you a car as a dealership. Looking at the buyer's order itself, it should list the make and model of the vehicle, its mileage, the VIN number. Again, we blacked it out, but check the VIN number. Does it match what the title is? Does it match the other paperwork that you're doing? The other thing that we see, I hate to say it quite often, is that dealerships will tell you, oh, we're selling you the car for $1,800. And they'll write down the price of the vehicle. But what they're not telling you is that every vehicle sold in the state of Delaware has to pay a tax. It's 4.25%. Now there's some exceptions to that. For example, if you're trading a vehicle or if your prior car was totaled, you do get a credit. But they're required to tell you what that tax is. And you can see this is a form that a dealership did where they're not noting what the tax is. That's a problem. This means that they're not telling you that you may have to pay additional money to register that vehicle. So that dealership's not doing you any favors. The next thing is when you buy it, you're going to have to register it in the state. And it's whether it's Delaware or Pennsylvania or Maryland, wherever, every state has annual fees that they charge to register a vehicle. In Delaware, it's $40 a year. So you'll see the next block is $40 or $80 for you to register a car for 1 year or 2. Here again, the dealership's not including that in what they're asking you to pay, which means when you go to DMV, that additional money is going to have to come from somewhere. More likely than not, the dealership's going to say it has to come from you. Temporary tag fee. Temporary tags in the state of Delaware, by statute, a dealership can only charge $20 for a temporary tag. There are some dealerships that will tell you it's $100 or $150. They are absolutely wrong. They are violating the law if they're asking you to pay more than $20 for a temporary tag. So those are some of the little things to look for. One of the other things I didn't highlight, but you also need to look at, is what they call a dealer fee or a processing fee. And that is how much the dealership is going to charge you to process all of the paperwork. You know, you hate to buy a car, hand them your cash, and then all of a sudden they come back to you and say, oh, well, if you want us to do your title paperwork, you need to pay us additional money. I'm going to actually ask Karen to help out here, because as the investigator, the head of the investigations, one of the things I know that comes up is people who have problems with the dealerships and then trying to, you know, register the vehicles or do the vehicles themselves.
Correct. The bill of sale, the items that George went over, those are required by law to be listed and separated out. All of the state fees, so the document fee, the registration fee, the temporary tag fee, and the titling fee, those are all statute required fees, and they're required to be separated out. The dealer processing fee can be whatever the dealer deems necessary to process it. If a Delaware dealer issues a Delaware resident a temporary tag, they are by law required to then process the paperwork themselves. So if you do not want the dealer to process your paperwork for you, do not accept a temporary tag from the dealer. You would either need to have that vehicle towed to your home or wherever, or you could bring all of your titling documents to the Division of Motor Vehicles, and we will issue you a temporary tag instead of it coming from the dealership.
Thank you so much. In closing, don't rush and don't put yourself in a situation where you need to rush. Putting yourself in a position where you need a car today or a car tomorrow can negatively impact your buying experience by preventing you from doing your due diligence and preparation, all things that we've talked about today. Ideally, purchasing a vehicle is a long-term thought process that begins before you even need it, which could be months in advance. In my case, it's 2 years. I'm still looking for it. But at least you should recognize how long it might take for you to think through some of those things that we've talked about here, whether it's a few days or a few weeks. That'll put you in the best position to identify and purchase your car that meets your own needs. That said, accidents happen. If you find yourself in a position where you need a car yesterday, do your best to take at least some of the steps we talked about today. Thank you for joining us, and a special thank you to George, Karen, and LaVincent.